Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.
So did you grow up on a farm in Illinois?
I did in fact grow up on a farm in rural southern Illinois.
Because I'm from southern Indiana, so that's funny. But I didn't grow up in rural Indiana. What was that like?
Very different than the city in LA, that's for sure. It's a lot slower, a lot of row crop farming, as I'm sure you know from Indiana as well.
Yeah.
So it's completely different types of farming as what we have out here in the hill country. There's no you can't farm row crops out in the hill country. You're kind of restricted to use cows, sheep, goats, etc.
Was there a lot of heavy sprays where you were at? Because I worked on a farm last year in Pennsylvania, and one of the guys, he's from Illinois, and he'd always talk about his neighbors just spraying just galore chemicals that would just seep over to where they're at too.
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, I don't know a whole heck of a lot about row crop farming, but from what I understand, whenever you're completely all in on that monocrop farming, you're kind of tied down to spraying all of the chemicals and pesticides, not to mention most of the cats around there where you're from and where I'm from, they probably don't even own the thousands and thousands of acres that they farm their row crops on, but they're basically tied to these big corporations like DeKalb and whatnot, so that they don't even hardly run their own operation. They're tied into that whole system of spraying pesticides, chemicals, fertilizers, and whatnot, just to keep the corn, soybeans, and then they strip the soil of all the natural nutrients that it needs to actually grow real plant life without all of the sprays.
Yeah. So I know you're a big reader. Have you read Meat Racket?
I've not heard of it, but it sounds like I would like it.
No, you really would. I just started, but on the topic of just like the farmers not really owning anything, it talks about the history of Tyson Foods and how they're essentially just modern day feudal lords, to where they had this beautiful package for farmers in Arkansas, and they provided them the chickens and the land to really lease on, but they had to just follow the plan, and if anything failed, they pretty much got screwed over continually, and Tyson just got bigger and bigger, more power, and there's just some wild and terrible stories that just wreck the farmers there because they have no control over that. And I actually just talked to one of my earlier episodes this week. She moved over from England. She was studying on mad cow disease, but she's from here. Her and her husband came to Vermont, and they wanted to start a sheep farm and really teach on cheese making, but then just start importing these sheep and just trying to get that population growing in America, because at the time it was very low, and I guess it's still pretty low. And as all that was going on, the USDA really essentially, they were trying to get funding from Congress to get a new facility in Ames, Iowa, and it was $450 million in funding, and they pretty much made the Three Shepherds cheese. They made them the scapegoat. They took all their sheep. This was around like 5:30 a.m. She mentioned that 42 armed federal agents came up to their door, took all their sheep, quarantined their farm for 5 years, and they were able to get that funding from Congress, and they have that beautiful new facility in Iowa because of that. And it's just, I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's just wild how a lot of that stuff happens, and that really opened up my eyes, because I have no background in farming at all. I switched into this whole world last year, and yeah, that a lot of these things have just woken me up to just what the hell is going on with all of that.
Well, I mean, it's just stories like that just, kind of explain exactly why the small farmer is, dying out in this country. It's because of stuff like that. We have so many, governing agencies over us that kind of take all the power away from the small farmer, and we can't do things the way that we want to. I shouldn't say we, because I do things exactly how I want to, but you get the point.
So the farm you grew up on, what was that experience like?
I mean, I sort of explain my family like, have you seen Sons of Anarchy? Probably.
No, but I know what you're talking about.
It's a very matriarchy, if you will. Like all of the women, they run the show, and then like my uncles, my cousins, my dad, all the men in the family, they run the farms, like run all the land. We raise cows, sheep, goats, hogs, did some row crops. It was really just a source of us raising our own food for the entire family, and then we would also hunt as well. That was pretty much it. It wasn't a business at all. It was just raising our own food.
So, because I know you started your ranch 2 years ago. Is that
Three
years
years,
ago?
yeah.
Did you, in between that time, did you think you were ever going to go back to doing anything like that?
No, I never thought that I'd be back farming or ranching. I'll also include that, the way that I view farming and ranching, the way that I view the world really has changed a lot since then. From the military to living in a busy city in LA to then just moving out here with Ramey. Farming for me has just become a completely selfish endeavor, really. Just a means of providing the best quality nourishment for myself and my family, and then my direct community, very, very close friends. That's it, really.
So I'm curious, how long were you in the military for?
4 years.
Because I remember listening to your podcast with Harry and Brett, and so to add context for me too, I spent 6 months of 2021 as my brother's caretaker, and I remember all that was for 6 months was just being at home and taking care of him and taking care of my mom. I didn't have a social life. That's really all I focused on for 6 months. And I remember trying to come back here after all of that ended. And since then, the only time I've had true inner peace was whenever I was on that farm. And I'm curious because 4 years of that, and then coming back here, I know I'm kind of glossing over a lot of things, especially not talking about anything with LA. Is one of those things that brought you to farming? Or like, I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with that. Does that resonate?
No, I see the parallels that you're drawing for sure. There is some inner peace and solitude in farming. Obviously, it's very peaceful, quiet, tranquil. There's plenty of manual labor to be done, and that's one of the biggest things that I find with a lot of guys sort of in my circumstance getting out is we got to stay busy. We got to keep our hands busy. We got to keep our minds busy. Otherwise, we spiral. And even just having your hands in with a pair of pliers fixing a fence, it's like you got that one single task in front of you, and you're just solely focused on that. There's no other distractions. There's no real noise, and you have a clear purpose every single day that you wake up. That's another thing. It's like sometimes we get out of the Marine Corps. We had a reason we had to get up every day, whether we accepted what that reason was or not. We were being forced up every day, but whenever we get out, some of us don't really have much of a reason to get out of bed, and we don't have much of a direction to our life. And so like when you got hundreds of animals to take care of every morning, that's your reason to get up and get after it. Yeah. So it's refreshing.
So after the military ended, did you go straight to LA, or what brought you there?
Yeah. So my getting out of the Marine Corps was kind of abrupt for me. I was in kind of a strange limbo where I had just gotten back off a deployment, and I was kind of being tossed around as potentially getting extended to be a combat instructor in 29 Palms. And so you have like a 20-day window where you're getting out as a civilian. And my 20-day window was getting eaten up by, not being sure if I need to turn in my gear and start getting all like my medical appointments and checkups and everything. So you got a bunch of stuff you got to do before you get out. And so that was all getting eaten up. And then it was like, 6 to 7 days before I was about to get out. And they're like, all right, you're not getting extended. Go turn in all your stuff, get all your paperwork taken care of, get all your medical appointments done. And here you go. You're a civilian now. Get out of here. Pack up your bags.
That's it?
Yep, pretty much. And, it's funny because, when we're in, all of us, we can't wait to become civilians. We can't wait to just do whatever we want. And it isn't until you actually become one that you're like, man, this is, whoa. You go from having every order given to you every single day, every hour of the day, really, like when you get to eat, how you're going to dress every day, what you're doing, to like, I can dress however I want. Like, shoot, where am I going to eat? Where am I going to find food? There's no chow hall in the civilian world. Anyways, I'm getting a little sidetracked, but I wound up in Los Angeles because all I really knew was that I wanted to do something in fitness. And where I was from in rural Illinois, not a lot of fitness going on there, a lot of farming, a lot of beer drinking. So I definitely wasn't going there. Los Angeles, people with money, a lot of fit people. So I packed up my bags, tossed them in my car, and I drove to LA and just kind of started figuring it out from there.
Do you remember whenever you first got there, what that feeling was like?
I do, yeah. I went straight to Venice Beach, and I didn't have a place lined up to live or anything. Luckily, the Marine Corps prepares you for homelessness like nothing ever would, especially with the beautiful year-round weather you get in LA. It's next to nothing. So I wound up in Venice Beach, near Gold's Gym, the Mecca, and I was just slumming it around there, sleeping on the boardwalk, sleeping out of my car until I sold my car, because I realized really quickly that having a car in LA wasn't great with the traffic and the parking and everything else. So I sold that.
Dang. And then, so how long were you in LA before coming here?
Well, from 2014 until 2020. So was it 6 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that path lead you to coming here and farming?
That's a really good question. Well, like I was saying, farming for me has just become, a way of closing the gap between the way that I eat. And I guess that could have, it started whenever I was in the city by just, seeking out local small butcher shops that I could like see where the cows were being raised, where they were coming from, grass fed, this, that. It kind of started there. And then after meeting Ramey, she had a house and a yard and everything, and we loved to cook together. And I can't explain exactly why or how it happened, but I just, one night, I just started collecting up all the fruit and vegetable scraps from us cooking and dug a hole in her yard and just created a compost pile. And I still have pictures to this day still of just taking pictures of the dirt and the compost. I go out there and like hoe it up and rake it around, and just, there was something fascinating to me about the way that soil was growing and living. And then from there, planting fruits and vegetables like tomatoes, berries in that soil that I'd been throwing compost in for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then from there, getting some chickens and having those in the city, even though I was not supposed to, just so that we could have our own eggs. There was something there inside me that just wanted to be able to start to take part in the process of my own food, if you will. And
yeah.
So it was those little tiny things that just kind of led into one another.
I like that a lot because I had never visited a ranch or a farm or talked to anybody in the space. I'm 29 now, and I think it was until last year, so 28 years, and I just realized how disconnected I was. And then when I went on a big road trip last year and visited some ranches, and I just remember having that first meal that all the food was produced on that land, and just being out in the land itself. I just can't describe the feeling. You just feel so connected to the natural environment to where I think that also just adds to the inner peace part. Just because as I grew up in a middle America suburb and then I moved straight here after college, so I never really experienced rural America or just that type of land. And even in the context of LA, you're still able to get that peace, which is really cool, and why people should just look into just doing something as simple as having just a small little plot of garden or chickens, because it just gets the wheel spinning in your head. And as you see the full cycle happen and you get those eggs and then you eat them, I the feeling is just.
I think kind of what you're describing is it's like your food, you're taking your food from being just a consumptive thing, and whenever you're kind of immersed in that process, it's more fulfilling, it's more nourishing. It's a sense of nourishment because effort was given in the attainment and the preparation of it, you know?
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying, so actually what you're saying there is something I've been thinking a lot about, because since starting this, one of the biggest questions that I get from a lot of people, and I'll categorize a lot of these people probably as, just kind of the same way I was living in the city. And the first thing they want to know is like, how many acres do I need to, raise like cows and sheeps and goats and this, when they're probably still just going to Ralph's or Walmart or whatever box food store and buying, their packaged produce and everything. When, the whole idea of like farming, homesteading, ranching, whatever you want to call it, is about less dependency. It's about self-reliance. And so even if you are in the city, you can still start to cut the amount of processing and processes that need to happen in order to get your food. You can cut them down by, giving out more effort in the attainment of your food, whether it's like reaching out and trying to find a local farmer and going and like buying the food straight from them. You cut out so many processes just doing that, or going to the local farmers markets and buying your fresh produce. Like, so many people are like, how do I know what fruits and vegetables are seasonal produce? Well, easy. Go to the farmer's market. Whatever is for sale, those people are growing that right now. It's in season.
Yep.
It's so simple. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, you don't need to jump 0 to 100 because you'll get in way over your head really quick. You can start to take those tiny little steps.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because whenever I was sharing everything I was working on the farm, people were really resonating with that, but then also a lot of people would just fantasize about the farm life and not realizing how much goes into it, because no matter what the weather's like, you got to take care of your animals. It doesn't matter if it's a Saturday and you had plans. If animals had other plans for you, you got to take care of them, and that just adds a whole nother deep appreciation for all of that, because you're from the beginning to the end of the whole process. And again, that's why I had wished it didn't take serious health consequences of my family to open up my eyes for all of that. But that's why I'm doing the Renaissance in the first place, because I'm noticing more and more people are waking up to that same thing. I mean, even just in the context of grocery stores, just the amount of bone broth, and there's more bone marrow, and you can get nose to tail organ blends. All of that has made a huge resurgence, and I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how this continues on, because even in regenerative agriculture, I had not heard of that word until last year, and even just reflecting on the last almost 18 months from that is growing really quickly.
Oh yeah. And I I kind of get a little bit of a more firsthand view of that as well with Ramey going back to LA and whatnot. You know, she's noticing the Erewhons, which Erewhon is like a bougie Whole Foods where all the
It's so expensive.
yeah, it's ridiculous. But anyways, that's one of the big marketing terms now is like regeneratively raise this or regeneratively raise that. I would argue that most people probably don't even know what that means, but
Not at all.
But before regenerative, it was sustainably, and really, I think what we started to realize was, well, sustain means to keep the same. So if our farming practices are sustainable and we're keeping the same, we're pretty much screwed because the way that things are right now are not good.
Yeah.
So we need a new word, regenerate, make better. Okay, make better is better. So we're going to use that word.
So whenever you first, well, I guess there's a two-part question. So you're in LA and you decided that you wanted to have land. What made you choose where you're at now?
Well, Ramey was born and raised in the city, so upheaving her from that straight into the boondocks is a big culture shock for her. So Dripping Springs, it was kind of like the happy medium for us. Like we have Austin right here, which within touching distance for her. It's like maybe an hour drive, and we could get enough land where we can farm and ranch. So it kind of worked out perfectly. That's all.
Is the place that you're at now, was it previously, was it a farm or a ranch previously?
Yeah. I will say that our property was just absolute gem of a find. And I'm starting to notice more and more now that properties like this are becoming very, very hard to find, because the first thing that'll happen is, whenever big developers or whatever find these properties, the first thing they do is just level the old farmhouse, and then it's like, well, it's an old farm and ranch house with several hundred acres that they've been running cattle on. That several hundred acres is just gonna be perfect to throw up like 8 to 10 acre tracts, and 8 to 10 acre tracts is like the perfect ranchette home for like the people with money coming out of the cities that want to have a little piece of land. So what I'm trying to say is our place was just unadulterated. Still, we have all the farm and ranch infrastructure from like the 1960s. It was a Longhorn working ranch, so I've got all the cattle working chutes and everything like that I've converted to be able to work sheep and cattle. And the house was just so wonderfully redone that Ramey just loved it. Mm-hmm. So it worked out well.
That's awesome. So you guys moved in. What did you start first with?
Well, I started first with cows, and starting out first, we only had 20 acres, and coming out of the city, 20 acres is a lot. It's a lot, but then also, because this property for 40 years was just trampled on by cows over and over and over and over. All of the pastures all around me were just super overgrown with invasive plant species. The soil's completely degraded. It's not growing very good grass. I didn't have nearly as much context as I needed to have. So, I started out running 6 cows out there. I noticed like they weren't growing. They ate all the grass down, and they just weren't performing well. So at that point, I kind of had to come back to the drawing board, like figure out what am I going to do with this land that I have, because cows are not working very good for me right now. So I had to figure out what I was going to do with my operations. So then I made a switch over to using goats to clear out all the brush, but then also tapping into Dorper sheep, which are an African sheep breed, and they just absolutely thrive where I'm at right now, and they have far less impact on the soil as what cows do, and they eat all the brush, the weeds, they eat everything.
So for the goats, that probably was interesting to watch because I had learned about goatscaping, and that is just wild to watch that you could have all these invasive plants and you just set your paddock up and the goats will just do their thing.
Oh yeah. Goats, I mean, they eat like prickly, like barbed bushes and just thorny stuff. They eat it all. But they're just, I don't have goats anymore. Goats are just a real pain. They're real pain, so I don't mess around with goats anymore. They did their job for me and they went on.
Can you give an example?
Oh my God. So for example, right now our lawn, our front yard is just bright green right now from this rain that we got. But also I frequently cycle sheep onto our lawn to graze the lawn and everything. So I don't ever have to mow or weed eat or anything because the sheep they'll eat all the weeds up against the house and the steps and along the driveway, and they eat the grass down to a perfect little length, and they're pooping, adding nitrogen into the soil, working it all in. Goats, on the other hand, they'll be climbing on the porch, they'll get on the roof, they'll climb on your cars. They also get their heads stuck in fences, and whenever you got hundreds of acres of pasture with fencing, and you got goats with their heads stuck in the fence all the time, it starts to become a real pain. So you can't use goats for any of that. And then if they get out into the yard, they're climbing on cars and stuff. That's a problem. So we don't mess with goats anymore.
No, that's funny because the first ranch I ever visited, they had goats, and I guess they would kind of feed them a little bit whenever moving, and there'd be one particular that would just run right at you and just headbutt the hell out of you to get their food.
Yeah. Well, and then that's the thing too. It's like the way that I'm using my animals is my animals work for me, and a lot of the time when you're trying to work with goats and you start feeding them that candy sweet feed, they'd start to get lazy and they're just laying around.
They turn into cats.
Yeah. They're kind of useless.
So whenever you were looking at sheep, were there other breeds? I was just curious in that thought process and the first part was what made you want to switch to sheep outside of, I know is the goat portion, but were there any other things that you were looking in particular to have in terms of the value of a sheep? And then the second part would be in terms of breeds, what were you looking at and what made you decide on the one that you have?
Well, Dorpers are incredibly drought hardy, being that they're an African breed, like I was saying. So they perform really well in the environment that I'm at. That's kind of something that that you can't really learn from a textbook maybe, but all farming is contextual, really. So like, what I did in Illinois, none of that has any carryover to where I'm at now. So like the certain species and breeds and the way that we raised animals there, they don't work here whatsoever. So that's essentially what I had to figure out with sheep was I needed to find a drought hardy animal that would be able to perform and then regenerate my soil while I was at it. Because I was starting to realize very quickly that in order for my animals to thrive, in order for my animals to be healthy, to give me good, healthy nourishment, that is directly dependent on the quality of the soil, because the quality of the soil is going to dictate what kind of plants and grasses I'm going to have growing for them to eat. If my cows don't have anything good to eat, they're not going to grow and they're not going to yield me any good beef. So I needed to go back. And then so sheep, they would make use of that really crummy brush on the pasture and then regenerate the soil all while they're at it. And then I can come back behind them and throw cover crops behind them so that I can grow some better grasses behind them to rotate them and keep rotating them. And then also another big plus with Dorpers is their meat is like the top quality lamb meat. So it's like the Angus of lamb meat.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's got a really, really good taste. So the way that I kind of explain it to a lot of people is if you've ever had like a rack of lamb and it's just got this super, super distinct gamey taste, that is due to the lanolin. Lanolin it's from the wool. So wool breed sheep have lanolin that gets in the meat, and then that's what gives it this like super distinct flavor. Dorpers are a half hair, half wool sheep, so they don't have that distinct flavor. Their flavor is very, very, very good, very sweet.
Do you have any sheep for milk?
No.
Because I've been told time and time again that's some of the best milk. I've never tried sheep milk.
I would say that's got to be like a super niche thing. And then also, another thing to look at is, what you're raising them for. If you have those sheep and you're looking for them to be producing milk, they're definitely not going to be getting the nutrients that they need off pastures around here. You're going to be supplemental feeding them in order for them to be producing milk, and they would not be able to keep up with that on pastures out here for sure.
You bring up a lot of good points because I'm in the middle of reading Will Harris's new book. Phenomenal book so far. And he was talking about whenever he studied at the University of Georgia in 1972, his degree was technically called animal husbandry. By the time you graduate in 76, they changed it to animal science. And it made me think about just the terminology a lot and how with industrial farming and monocropping and how it's become really techno-focused. And you were just talking about how with agriculture, it's so context dependent. Like you're saying, everything in Illinois is different from here. And it's just so fascinating with just the industrial farming and how it's just one size fits all. And then just the disastrous consequences that have happened because of all that. Because there's another book, Dirt, Erosion of Civilizations, which really opened up my eyes to a lot of the famines that have happened just in ancient civilizations have just been from overplowing and a lot of the same things that we do now and what caused the Dust Bowl. I'm not too sure where I'm going with that. It's just crazy how the further we steer away from the natural environment, how much we suffer from it.
Well, it all started, I don't know if you've read Wendell Berry.
Not yet. I have his Unsettled Living in America.
You have to. You absolutely have to. It all started with a lot of what he was pointing out, and the sole thing was that food became a burden to us. And when food became a burden to us, it started making headline news that one American farmer can now feed 10,000 people. That's awesome. That's great. So now we don't have to burden ourselves with food or anything. Everything can be taken care of for us so that we can become doctors and lawyers and pharmacists and everything else. And, not everybody needs to be a farmer. Not everybody wants to be a farmer. Not everybody needs to be a farmer. But, I think there's a direct correlation between the relationship between us and the procurement of our food. And whenever we're viewing our food as a burden in the preparation and the attainment of it, that's where we start to get a lot of those ill consequences. And monocropping, I had a hard time understanding the term monocropping for a long time, but that doesn't just apply to, corn and soybeans. That applies to people that just run cattle or just run one species of something. There's nothing nearly as wrong with that, except for whenever you start to condense those cattle to a feedlot, or those cattle just working the same exact pieces of land over and over and over and over again. It's like whenever you zoom out and take a big picture look at like the African plains, it looks that way for a reason, because there's such a diverse amount of species that they're grazing it, working it, and they're all adding and taking. And so whenever we begin to monocrop and just run the same animal species over, that's when we start to have like pests and diseases, and our animals are less healthy. The soil is far less healthy. We're stripping it because they're eating only the same plants off of the soil over and over and over again. But, obviously with regenerative agriculture, it's the best way to do things. But at the same time, the people who are doing regenerative farming, they can't feed the world. They can't feed that many people. We have a lot of people to feed, so we have to use systems to feed them all. That's the kind of predicament that I've noticed. It's like people who do what I'm like, I always tell people, like, I'm not farming to feed the world. Like, I'm not farming to fight climate change or anything. I farm for purely selfish reasons, honestly. And the way that I do it is, in my opinion, the best practices, focused on animal welfare and regenerating the soil. And I get good quality nourishment, and so do my friends. But, at the same time, I can't feed very many people doing it that way. Nobody can.
So I'm curious, since you're 3 years in, do you plan to, I guess, what's your plan with that? Do you just want to keep with what you're doing, or do you want to add more different types of animals, or continue to expand? Or,
I mean, right now, knock on wood, I finally think that I've found like a pretty good flow of things. I find that pigs, sheep, cows, I found a good little system where they work really well together in the method that I use them. I don't think that I want any more. I don't need any more, really. So my plan really is just to keep regenerating the soil so I can keep raising healthier animals and raise my family doing that, and they get to reap the rewards of that as well.
So what's the system like to where they just work so synergistically? I don't even know if I mentioned that word right.
I mean, to be clear, there is no synergistic things that are happening. I don't want to use the word chaotic, but it's complex, as nature is complex. And so whenever you're trying to replicate nature within fence lines, it's very complex. Every single animal species has a different relationship with every other animal species. And they also have a different relationship with the environment that they're in. Example, sheep need guardian dogs. Guardian dogs don't understand that they're not supposed to kill chickens. They also can't distinguish the difference between a feral hog on their pasture and my domestic hogs that I'm raising. And so when using these species, I have to constantly be kind of like scheming how I'm going to be moving my sheep from one pasture to another, to move my pigs over onto another pasture, while also not letting my dogs into a place where they can get to my chickens on the other pasture that are turning over the soil behind everything else. That's just one small little example.
And you're doing this all by yourself?
Rami helps me to her utmost capacity, but 97% of the time, yes.
I'm just thinking, because whenever I worked on the farm, I just remember there would be a couple of times where how their farm layout was, in the middle was the houses where we stayed and some of the crops, and then just two giant hills, and they'd use the hills as paddocks for sheep, turkeys, chickens, pigs, and then cattle. And there'd be a couple times where I'd look over and the cattle have just gotten out.
Mm-hmm.
How are you able to do that by yourself?
I'll tell you, over the past 3 years, I've developed an immense amount of patience. But then also, a little bit of an acceptance that there are things that are within my control and a lot of things that are not within my control, especially in the context of farming and whenever I'm trying to replicate nature. So there are a lot of things that'll be demanding my immediate attention, but I have to learn how to prioritize everything every morning when I walk out the door. More often than not, if you find yourself racing to find a solution, it's probably not the right one. I've found that my best decisions and my best actions, if you will, have come from, detaching, taking a moment, looking at the whole situation, observing what's going on, and then responding accordingly.
Has that patience translated to just developing just patience overall for every aspect of your life?
I would like to think so.
Because I know you mentioned on Brett and Harry's podcast how in LA that you're saying you weren't pleasant to be around,
No.
and was that just from anger?
I think it was a lot of things. I mean, like I was saying a little bit earlier, it was kind of an abrupt, an abrupt change from the Marine Corps into being a civilian. And, I went 0 to 100 immediately becoming a civilian in a busy city, trying to figure out living conditions, how to make money, how to get by. I never really took any time at all to process certain things from the military or reflect or do the things that I needed to grow up as a human being, really. Just kind of suppressed a lot of things, and I was more or less a ticking fucking time bomb, to be honest with you. And so, yeah, there's that analogy of like, if you run into one unpleasant person, what is it? I'm sorry. If you run into one jerk a day, like they're the jerk. But if you keep running into jerks all day, like you're probably the jerk.
Yeah.
And so that was essentially me, and I needed to come to terms with that.
Has just being out in the land helped with just, I guess, with those suppressed memories and I guess emotions? Has that helped just go through that? Because that's why I also mentioned in terms of the peace of being out on the farm, because I had suppressed so much with my brother and mom to where whenever I'm in the city, I don't know, it's just way different than just being out on the farm, to where outside of whenever you're doing all of the madness and chaos and taking the time to just sit there and all you just hear is nature. That made me I'm trying to figure out how it even felt. I felt true peace, and that's the only time I've truly felt at peace the last 3 years.
There's a lot of, so maybe chaos isn't the right word for, managing all the animals and whatnot, because it's not stressful. That's what it is. It may be chaotic. It's not stressful because I'm passionate about it and I'm doing something that I love. And so I think when we're in the city, there's a lot of distractions, there's a lot of noise, and we're bombarded with stimulation. We don't really have that solitude to actually like take a deep breath and reflect, like what you're talking about. It's like pure solitude that you can just sit alone with yourself and your thoughts and just, come to terms with things. And, with the chaos of, moving animals all the time, there are also a lot of just really incredible moments, like when the sun's going down and you're just kind of out in the pasture, you're just sitting on a rock, and literally the only sound you can hear is just like sheep and cows just like tearing grass, just like biting grass. And like sometimes that's when you're like, man, like this is it right here.
Yeah, I relate to that so much. I also remember it was only after a month and a half on the farm, I went to Pittsburgh, and just sensory overload.
Oh, yeah.
I just remember hearing all of the honking, and just like internally, I just felt so tense, and it makes you just realize how different that is. But also, I remember and cherish just waking up before the sunset and letting the chickens out, and then just that's all you hear, the chickens, and then the sun's rising, and there's it's just so awesome. So, and on family, because you're about self-sufficiency and you want to have the best quality food for your family. Yeah, because this has really changed my perspective on that as well. I thought I was going to live in a big city and, raise my family and just the typical, I guess, city life. But now all I think about is raising a family on a ranch and just the experiences as the kids. Because, again, I keep going back to this farm. He had a kid 5, 3, and 1. And just watching them out there, I can't put into words just how much better that seems like for kids. And I know you were mentioning on Brett and Harry's podcast that Remy had friends with their children at your place, and just watching them. Can you just talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, like in the city, you're always fighting for space. You're always fighting for space, and raising kids in LA, I see these families bring all their kids to like some corner in the middle of the city with like 12 feet worth of grass that's just reeks of bum urine, and there's just trash everywhere, heroin needles laying around, and these kids, they don't know any better. They're having a good time, having fun and everything. That's great. But there's not a whole lot of freedom in that. And I don't know if this is the right thing to say or not, but where I'm at, I could put a gun in a kid's hand and let him shoot it in any direction he wants. He's not going to hit anything, anyone, nothing. And there's something really freeing about that feeling. And going back to Ramey's girlfriend bringing her boys out, like, man, what a blast. Just what a blast it was. Like, watch these kids just run around and just tear hell in the dirt, digging hole, like just amusing themselves for hours, just digging a hole in the dirt, climbing trees. And then like the first time that one of them was like, asked the mom, can we go outside? It's like, you can do whatever you want. Yeah, of course you can go outside. It's like, you can run wherever you want. Like, it's completely safe out there. You can't really do that in the city. It's like, kid can't run outside all by themselves. And, in terms of raising a family out there, I think there's a stark difference between, having fun and happiness. And that was a big lesson I really learned as a child. But, I also learned a whole lot about hard work and the fulfillment from that. It's like, simple things like, watermelon tastes a whole hell of a lot better when you've spent all day on a hay wagon in the 100-degree heat than it does sitting in an air-conditioned house just chomping on it, sitting on a comfy couch. And those are the types of lessons that I want my kids to grow up with.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Just as a society now, even just reflecting my own life, I had a very comfortable life. I didn't really go through any hardships. I was fortunate, had awesome parents and family. And just at the start of the pandemic with the cancer stuff with my brother and my mom, that was the first time I had gone through any hardships. And that's why I also talk about just reaching out to your local farms and ranches to not even necessarily work, but just to talk with them, hear their stories, and then potentially volunteer and then have your kids there. Just doing that hard work, like you're saying, it adds so much fulfillment, and I don't know if purpose is the right word, probably just fulfillment, because it makes all of those, because whenever I was on the farm, and for me, it was really stressful because it was the worst health I had ever been and just didn't have any answers. But just going through all of that and hearing the conversations of the folks that were actually consuming the produce and the land, but also me eating it itself, I have never had more fulfillment in my life. And that's why I guess that kind of adds to the peace aspect. The fact that I had a good life, I had a good paying job in tech in Austin in a major city, but it still paled in comparison to just being on the farm and having that food.
I mean, it's a stark disconnect from, God's ultimate punishment to man. It's, by the sweat of your brow, you must, essentially work for your food. And so when you don't work for your food, there's like this certain detachment that you have. And I think that you're having trouble explaining that for a reason, because it's hard to understand that detachment until you actually close that gap and truly close it. And until you've fucking hauled water in the 100-degree heat to your cows and hauled hay when it's snowstorm and 20 below to take care of your animal, and then you have that nourishment, it's like, wow, you can't explain it. And you want to, I find myself wanting to, share that with the people closest to me. Like, I want to share that food with them, and a lot of people are like, well, don't you want to sell to more people? Like, do you want to make money? Like, are you going to like turn it into a business? Not really. Like, I could really care less if people I don't know are eating my food. I would prefer to like enjoy it with people that I truly care about.
I like that. So I'm curious, because you just on the topic of God, but for me, this was the most unexpected outcome of switching into agriculture. I was agnostic my whole adult life, and it was my brother's death that made me start thinking about it again. But being on the farm made me really, I guess, become a believer in God. It's not necessarily, it has to be about religion, but I'm curious, since being on this ranch the last 3 years, are there any things that have just had amazing outcomes that just were completely unexpected from you since making this huge shift from LA to just being on a ranch?
Unexpected. I don't really know how to answer that question. I mean, I think I've grown spiritually being on the land, for sure. Getting out of the city, and I've raising animals and experiencing life and death all of the time, and really reflecting on that process. It'll definitely force a lot of spiritual questions upon you. I won't say that I'm one type of religion or another. I know that I battled a lot with these questions, being that I went overseas and I saw like what religion is like there and what religion is like here, and it's a confusing topic for me, to be honest with you.
I guess I didn't best say that question because for me, the most unexpected thing of whenever I switched into agriculture and worked on that farm was just on the topic of God, and I became close to that. I didn't know if it doesn't have to be related to religion. It's just, were there any things that just, since being on that ranch, because it's just been completely different lifestyle than what you've previously had, I'm struggling to really figure out how to best ask that question. Do you see where I'm getting at
Maybe.
all?
I mean, I think that, caring for animals has certainly forced me to tap more into a nurturing part of myself, and possibly that is disguised as preparation for me. I don't want to say that raising livestock is the same as raising kids, but maybe in some aspect the attributes, the characteristics, I'll say, that are going into successfully running a farm. And more often than not, it's not even totally successful. It's just not an utter failure. But I think that those are probably, I'd like to think, setting me up to be a good dad, maybe. Because with that balance of nature and nurture, I think that my life experiences have really tapped into the nature of things and really suppressed the nurture, and so I'm having to build a stronger relationship with that.
What's her experience been like since those 3 years too? Since you said that she was raised in a city and she lived in LA, has this? Yeah, I'm curious to hear what her experience has been like.
Man, some days it's just most days it's just absolutely incredible, because it's just like you just got to spend time around the animals to like start to learn their behaviors and like how they work. And so, you know, like I said, she does help me around a lot. She would probably help me more if I asked her for more help, but I'm pretty stubborn and like, screw it, I'll figure it out on my own. I don't care how, but I'll figure it out. But she's become an incredible ranch hand. It's like she knows, like, kind of, it's weird unless you've ever done it, but like she knows where to position herself, like on a cow's flank or sheep, to like to make a group, and like how to push them certain way just from doing it so much with me. You're like which way a gate swings open or closed, to like, because if a gate is open a certain way, sheep won't go through it, but if it's open another way, they will go through it. And like she's picked up on all these little bitty things. I think she's adapted really, really well.
Yeah, I'd be curious too.
She's gotten just our way of life out there has forced her to get a lot tougher. It's like in the city of, like, you know, perfect 70, if it's not 73 degrees outside, it's fucking 73 or 75 degrees on the thermostat in the house. Everything is perfect. And so, like, the way that we live now, it's like there are a lot of like uncomfortable times that we have to go through. Like, you know, if the cows, you know, step on a water pipe and break it and run the well dry, and we can't flush our toilets anymore, and until I can fix the well and fix the pipe and everything, and or like in the middle of an ice storm when we don't have power, we don't have running water, anything, like she bucks up and deals with it.
That keeps going back to just why even just developing these relationships and just going out there can be such a small step, but really change your perception and harden you just a little bit, even if you still live in the city. Because, again, going back to just the convenience and how you just want to be self-sovereign about just farming, because whenever you're in LA, you go to the grocery store, expect everything to be stocked. Everything is just designed to make your life easier, and you don't have to think about any of it.
Because food is a burden.
Yeah.
You don't have to think about it because work is more important, you know. And I don't like to spiral too much down that rabbit hole, but because we do have to make money and everything, but at the end of it all, like, you get to a point where I don't spend a whole heck of a lot of money at all. I've got 7 deep chest freezers stocked, filled with beef, lamb, pork, chicken. We got eggs up to the freaking ceiling. So it's like, we don't have to spend a whole heck of a lot of money on food. And so as fruits and vegetables and whatnot, we trade up eggs or beef or pork to people that we know that provide, you know, fruits and vegetables for us. It works out really great. It's an odd little system, but it's fun.
So I've got one last question for you. So whenever you first moved there, and I guess having these relationships with the other ranchers and farmers nearby, what was that like at the start? Because I'm assuming that they had some preconceived notions about this guy from LA coming out here and having this land.
Yeah, I've never really cared a whole heck of a lot about what people think about me, to be honest with you. I have actually just very recently, one of the processing facilities is an old school, like mom and pop processing facility that I took my pigs to. And so like the head butcher, the guy who runs the place, he's been there 30, 40 years, super just hard, disgruntled person. And like my ears really perked up when I first, met him, because like when I meet people that disgruntled, it like triggers a red flag for me, because normally that's kind of how I am, or I was. And so it kind of in a way reminds me of myself. Like, man, what's this guy's deal? But it was exactly what you're saying. He sees me like the neck tattoos, the hand tattoos. He like a yuppie rancher is what they refer to it. And I don't really know how to answer your question. I just go on doing what I'm doing, and I'm not really too terribly concerned what people think about me. I'm doing things as resourceful as I can. I don't know if you've seen that goofy TV show with that Jeremy Clarkson fella, Clarkson's Farm.
Mm-hmm. I haven't been.
It's basically like, imagine like Kim Kardashian, the Kardashians have a farm. And so it's amusing to watch, because all the problems that happen on the farm, he just throws money at it. And it actually just compounds even more problems, because he's not actually fixing anything. He's just throwing money at all his problems. So what I'm trying to say is I don't give myself the backstop of throwing money at problems. If you came out and looked at my operations, you'd see that I reuse everything that I've like found off the land. I use like old kitchen sinks as like feeder and water troughs that I like found out in the pasture, like old rusty beat up gates. I've like figured out a way to like make little chutes with them and whatnot. So,
That's really cool, because that's also another awesome aspect of agriculture, is just the history piece. Because again, the very first ranch I visited, I can't remember how many acres it was, but they had an old tractor that just broke down from, I think, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they just kept it there. But that's such a just cool piece to just, because then that makes you just reflect on all of the time before you were here and how they were caring for the land. It's so awesome.
Personally, I think farm infrastructure is so cool. Like the cattle sorting pens and everything. It's just so cool to me.
I really like the infrastructure of barns.
Yep, that too.
Well, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciated this.
Yeah, this was a fun conversation.
Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.